piece of skin was brought to us, and it appeared like it is from a colobus monkey. And actually they had accused this person to be dealing with a skin of a wildlife. So when I looked at it, I doubted, because it was long and all that. Then when I tried to compare it with the skins that we have, or monkeys that we have, it didn't match very well. So I decided to give it to the backward of wildlife, and actually that was found to be goat skin. That has happened. And then another thing is that sometime back here there was some body parts that were brought to us, and there was no bone in that, and we were supposed to identify. When I looked at them, it was difficult to tell, even though I suspected that there could be a domestic animal body part. So when I referred that to backward of wildlife, they indeed confirmed that that was body parts of a cow.
In a criminal setting, the burden of proof is beyond reasonable doubt. If you're found with something, you have to prove that this is that particular thing, right? So it's easy to prove it's something like a radio. You can take notice that this is a radio. If it's a book, it's a book. But with things concerning animals, you have to prove that this is a species. From this species, you need to know its origin, where it has come from, and all that. So when you show that, that is shown through taking it through DNA analysis, and DNA analysis obviously shows whether it's an elephant. I know it seems simple, but you actually need to show that it's an elephant. We have other sources of ivory like hippo teeth. So if it's worked ivory, and you need to just show that this is actually ivory from a particular elephant from a particular area. And then a report is done. Then the report is presented as evidence in court. So you see, it's one of those crucial documents that is required to actually prove that this trophy that you are captured with comes from a particular elephant or from a particular area, an elephant attributed to a particular area, or, and to some extent, it provides further information of where the ivory comes from. So we've had cases that have been attributed from West African countries like Congo, and only that can be known through proper DNA analysis. And then from there, when you present such evidence, it is crucial of course with other additional evidence in whether this person knew whether this was ivory. So there are several elements which needed to be proved, and one key element was the DNA analysis report. It's presented to the magistrates. The magistrates looks at the documentation, and if it's proper, it serves a big role in whether the person is convicted or let go.
Wildlife criminals deal with rhino horn or elephant tusk. They don't deal with it, they no longer deal with it as rhino horn, as ivory. So they grind it, they make it into powder. So when you ask them, or when they are taken to court, they can easily say that this is maize flour or wheat flour. And if you don't have anything to substantiate that this is not the truth, then the wildlife criminal goes scot-free. But then we have now a technology that can be able to get that ground material and then extract DNA from it and then match it with any DNA barcode that we have in our library and say with certainty that is rhino horn or that is elephant tusk. So that is one of the most convincing thing to the magistrate. The magistrate wants that he doesn't want to put a person in prison for 20 years for something that is not substantiated. But if you convince him beyond reasonable doubt, then definitely he's going to give him a 20-year jail. We have been dealing with about 5 animal taxa. We deal with mammals, we deal with birds, we deal with fish, we deal with invertebrates, and we deal with amphibians and reptiles. So the National Museums of Kenya have taxonomists and zoologists whose training is to go out in the field, and we give them a list of the animal species that we want. And first we had to do a desktop work to be able to know where the distribution of these animals, where do we find them in Kenya, so that we can plan for a field trip based on the distribution of the animals. So when we go out as a team of specialists in mammals, specialists in birds, specialists in different taxa, then we either collect a whole animal or we collect samples or tissues in an organism, depending on restrictions. For example, for birds, we are not allowed to collect an animal. We are only allowed to collect samples from the bird. So what we would do for a bird is to collect blood sample. But for fish, where there is no regulation against collecting a whole animal, then they would fish out a fish and then probably take the heart, the muscle, the liver, any part of the animal where a DNA is very easy to extract. And then when we are still in the field, we collect what we call metadata. Where is this sample coming from? We have to fill in a data sheet that tells us the location where the organism was collected, the georeferencing, the GPS location, who is the collector, what is the date, and a lot of other information. And then we fill that in what we call field information management system. So when we come back to the museum, now before that, we have to preserve these samples in a way that the DNA is going to be extractable. So we can preserve them. Normally we preserve them in nitrogen, liquid nitrogen. That is freezing enough to be able to get the DNA very well when we get back to the museum. So when we come back to the museum, then we do what we call sampling. So one sample, we divide it into different samples because we want to keep part of the sample, so that in case during the process of processing these samples, you may get contamination, or sometimes you may get results that you did not expect. So at least you have a backup somewhere for another sample you can use. And also for those samples from which we get vulture specimen. Vulture specimen meaning the whole organism was collected, was killed, we come with it, and then we put it in our collection. The National Museum have a very large collection, the largest probably among the largest in Africa, but of course the largest in East Africa. So that is important, so that in case the court would want to see the exhibit of an organism from which the exhibit was taken, then we can show them that. And then the samples are taken to the laboratory. So in the laboratory, we also subsample them, because we don't want to take chances, because getting samples from the field is very hectic. You can go to the field for 20 days looking for a sample from one species and you come back with 0. So you can imagine how difficult, how precious that sample can be. So when you go to the lab, then you fill you do the extraction that I was talking about, you do the amplification, you do the purification, and you do the sequencing. And then this information, you fill it in another database that we call Laboratory Information Management System. Those two are very important because whenever a magistrate asks a question, those information are going to be very important in the conviction of the wildlife criminal.
This project actually is part of the US strategy to reduce illegal wildlife trafficking, and that's why they funded it. And we focus mainly on plants, which are normally ignored, not given as much as attention as animals. So first and foremost, we are looking at how to reduce illegal wildlife trafficking. And for plants, most of them are valued for herbal medicine, ornamentals, and many other things. And at the moment, the commercial illegal trade in plants is actually the biggest threat to them. And what the traffickers do is they collect plants and modify them. So you'd not find a normal plant with its leaves and twigs and everything. You'd probably find it in powder form or bark, or maybe in liquid form. And then these offenders have been arrested. Many times they've been arrested, taken to court, but there's no scientific proof. Because if I have a powder and I tell you it's prunus and yet it's sandalwood, if you're not an expert, you will not be able to tell the difference. And that's where now DNA has come in. Because with DNA you can verify anything irrespective of what form it's in.
Long time we had been wondering about the effect of trade on wild plant resources, and so we prepared a project which would allow us to collect data from the wild and from the people who deal in plants in the market, so that we are able to collect information about what sort of plants they were trading in, who are their customers, and what were the specific destinations of these plant products. Okay, so initially we prepared a questionnaire which we tested on a pilot basis in a small market in Kamkunji, and then we rolled it out so that our target population were markets that border Kenya and Tanzania, particularly Tanzania, because we tend to think that this is really a porous border where we trade a lot of plants from the wild, but there is really no government record about plants that are in trade. So after the questionnaire was ready, we went out to the market and we met these people. Most of the people that tend to deal in plants, particularly non-timber forest products, were actually the herbalists who are collecting roots, fruits, leaves, barks of plants, and they were actually just deploying their own indigenous knowledge to treat fellow Kenyans and people who visited their stalls, their market stalls, or visited them at home. While we are in the field, we collect information which we loosely call the field data, where we fill the locality, the name, and we describe the general area where we find the plant, and we also describe the state in which we found the plant, so that we can actually prepare the herbarium data to go together with the DNA data. And once we arrive back to the museum with the sample, then we take the field sample which we collected for DNA, and we process it through now the DNA lab. But with the herbarium specimen, we simply dry it and deposit it to the herbarium collection. And these two materials are actually connected.
What we did was to, first of all, generate data, find out what these plants are, where they are found, who's trading in them, where they're coming from. And then out of that, we needed to know, out of these plants, how many of them can actually be used for sustainable use. And then we documented those that were in illegal trade and sampled them and created a DNA reference library. This is the same library that now the enforcement and regulatory agencies are using to verify exhibits for court cases. For this project, the most important thing is we've demonstrated that the DNA works. We've used our reference library to prosecute and convict people. And we have not lost any case so far. And secondly, the same DNA records can be used for fraud. For example, if you go in a market and buy a herbal medicine and it's a powder, how would you tell that it's moringa or it's whatever they're telling you it is? So DNA again can help in verifying what actually the components of that particular herbal medicine is. I think there's no doubt that plants are very important for our survival. So really it's just necessary that we conserve them and also mitigate any negative impacts that are likely to threaten them or are detrimental to their survival. I think that should be everybody's responsibility. It shouldn't just be left to the scientists or conservationists or the government. I think it takes everybody in their little environment, in their little piece of land to start some initiative to protect plants.
The overall goal is that if we leave the wildlife, the endangered wildlife species to continue, the trend in which they are going in the wild to continue like that without any intervention, then it means that we are going to have a lot of animal species going into extinction. Kenya is very important for a number of species that are endemic only to Kenya. Because we are in the equator, we have different ecological conditions that are favorable for different species. So one thing that we want to maintain is that wildlife is our heritage. We want our children, our children's children, to be able to see a rhino, to be able to see an elephant. Some of these animals, the wild populations are very low. So we believe that our technology is going to help to increase the number of convictions in Kenyan courts. If that is happening, then it is going to hinder a lot of wildlife criminals from poaching. And if that is happening, it means that the wildlife population of those animals is going to increase. And Kenya is one of the countries whose economic growth is partly dependent on tourism. And these animals are some of which tourists come to see. So number one, you would increase the wildlife population of endangered species. Number two, you would create jobs, because when tourists come, who take them to national parks to show them where these animals are? They are the tour guides, so they get employment. And so we believe that this project is going not only to help conservation of wildlife, but it is also going to contribute to communities in a way, because it is going to create employment.